And we're live. Hello and welcome to Ladies Corner with T. My name is T Adeyemo, and today I have the President and Chief Operations Officer of the Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta, Dr.Jean Walrond, and she joins us to talk about sickle cell anemia, what they do at the foundation, and also be talking about literacy. She was involved recently in a literacy campaign. So, good afternoon, Dr. Jane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am. The
Mhm.
first thing that comes to mind is how long have you been involved with Sickle Cell Foundation? How did you get involved with it?
Okay. Thank you for having me have this conversation with you today. I got involved in Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta in 2001. That's when the organization um, started in Edmonton, this particular one. But in terms of how long I have been involved with the whole concept of sickle cell anemia, I'd say about 50 years.
Um, did you say 50 years?
Yeah, 50 years because I was living in Montreal when I took my first test to see if I had the illness, and I was told no. Then, so this occurred in 1969. Then I moved to Nova Scotia, where I had my second child, who ended up having sickle cell anemia. So I realized that when they told me that I didn't have the trait, it was incorrect.
Okay.
So this is when I wanted to know more about sickle cell because I had now to raise a young girl, a baby, who was only 2 years of age and she had the disease.
Dr. Jane, I'm going to ask you to move your laptop a bit to the center so we can see your full face right now. If you like this.
Okay.
Yes, it's very
So
much
that's
better.
good
Thank
now.
you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I should sit straight and stuff.
So, how is your daughter now?
My daughter,
How old is she now?
she is 47.
Oh, 47 years old. I'm 42. So she's 5 years
Oh,
older than I am.
that's right. So, yeah, she's 47.
Hmm.
She has a career in real estate.
Right.
She graduated from the University of Alberta with a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing, and she has a 7-year-old boy.
Amen.
Mm,
Amen.
amen. Right.
I'm just wondering, had the doctors diagnosed it properly, would you have gone on to have a second child if you had known that you were a carrier of the gene?
You know, that question has, okay, I'll have to give you the backstory. My I was dating a young man from Guyana, and he told me at the time that he came from a very large family, but one of his sisters, who was his very best peer, she died at the age of 15 with sickle cell anemia. And I said, "What's that? I never heard of sickle cell anemia, although I came from Trinidad and my parents owned a pharmacy. So I knew nothing about it." But then he started to talk to me and he said how he knew he had this trait in 1967 was because a doctor at the University of McGill was doing some research, and she came to the campus and wanted to get blood from black people, and she was paying them $10 a pint. Well, in 1969, $10 a pint, $10 is a good stipend for a student, especially a foreign student. So he paid his $10. He gave his blood and got his $10. And then they contacted him later and said, "Oh, we found what we were looking for," and gave him 15 more dollars for another pint of his blood. And when he inquired as to what they were looking for, they said they were looking for sickle cell traits or sickle cell blood.
Mm.
So when he told me so, I said, "Oh," and then he explained to me the how you have to have two parents who have the trait, and then they have a 25% chance of having a child with sickle cell anemia. So before I got married, I was living in Montreal, and they at that time they were taking the blood from people. They always tested people's blood before they got married. I believe they were looking for Tay-Sachs disease. And so I said to the doctor at that time, okay, since you're going to take my blood to look for this, why don't you um, test for sickle cell trait as well? And this is when the results came back negative for me, only to find
Mm.
out 4 years later that that was not true. But the question you asked me was if I had known that my daughter had sickle cell anemia, what would I have done if I knew that I had a trait?
Yeah.
Well, I have often felt guilty that my daughter has sickle cell anemia, and I have often sometimes said, I I've often lamented on the fact that I didn't know I had the trait before I had my children.
Mm.
And one day my daughter said to me, "Well, I'm fine. If you knew you had the trait, I wouldn't be born, so that's fine." So
Oh.
yeah, so you get strength
Mm.
from different ways. And though she was suffering from the illness, she she gave me permission to not feel sad about not knowing that I had the trait. So
Oh, yeah, and
yeah.
children are angels, and I'm really grateful she, in a way, healed you of the burden you were carrying,
Yes,
and
she's a
all that guilt. Mm.
she's a remarkable person because she's the kind of person that I look to, even though she has had her treatments and so. I look to for strength because she is nothing phases her.
Mm.
And so, she's still around. And I have a grandson because of her. Even though I have two girls, she's the only one who has given me a grandchild. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. I have a cousin who is sickle cell. He's anemic like that, and I,
Mhm.
I have to say, and one of my best friends as well is a carrier of the gene of the disease. But these
Mhm.
people are very special because they've encountered pain and suffering in a way most of us will never know. So I think in a way it purifies them, and they are just beautiful people, beautiful individuals. And I'd say for my friend and for my cousin, so I get now, I see why SCFA is very important to you. And now you've taken this as your lives. So I want to talk about earlier misconceptions when you started. How hard was it when you started SCFA 15 years ago too? So you said 2001,
2000, it started around 2001, so it's about 20 years.
about 20 years right
Yeah.
now. How was it how easy was it to change people's perceptions, to get funding, to even get it started to where you've gotten it up to now? Please share the journey with us.
Well, the journey is a journey in progress.
Oh.
And so we cannot sit on our laurels and think that we have reached where we are supposed to be. I
Mm.
am still pushing, and I will only consider myself a success when I am able to have a research chair at the university, either in Calgary or or in Edmonton, that has a research chair to study not only sickle cell anemia, but sickle cell trait, because that in itself is a problem, and we haven't even begun to look at it. But I would say that this organization, Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta, has been very fortunate because it was started by two young students. One was at the University of Alberta studying medicine, and the other one was still in high school. And they came from Ghana, and they were very new to Edmonton, so they knew very little about this social construct of the city, probably Canada and Alberta as well. So they went ahead, got it organized with their doctor, and was able to get all the different uh, forms and documents completed so that we became a charitable organization with charitable status and on a very good foundation. So we didn't have money at the time, but we were well organized. So, in terms of this organization, I praise all the people who have been part of it, because at every step of the way, people have come into the organization and brought their talents to it and left the organization stronger because of that. So today we can say that we have charitable status. We have a brand that we promote, and we have things in place so we can move forward instead of trying to go backwards and trying to get things organized and so. But in terms of awareness, we still have challenges, I would say. We have challenges because sometimes the patients go to the hospital, and in truth and in fact, some of the medical establishment do not know much about the illness. As you can as you can tell, it's an illness that intersects race and immigrant status and so on. So it's not something that was relatively new, relatively known, excuse me, in Canada. When I say so, the experiences that we have had to go through in the school system to allow for my to allow for my not only my other daughter who does not have sickle cell anemia, but one who has to go to school, race and health. And it was difficult in most cases because every time you went to a different grade, you had to explain to the teacher about sickle cell anemia. It was something as if there were no protocols in place so that it would make her going through her K to 12 system smooth. Even when she attended university, there was no protocol in place so that people knew that this patient has sickle cell anemia. So every step of the way, I had to be there to intervene and to advocate for her, advocate for my other girl, but also advocate for her because you have no race and health as the nexus of this human being. So this has allowed me actually to be very cognizant of sickle cell anemia, very cognizant of the education system, very cognizant of the health system. And so I continue to navigate and to find ways that I can bring more knowledge to different systems so that people who have sickle cell anemia would have a better life, would
Mm.
be able to self actualize.
Mm. I hear you. Thank you for giving a very detailed answer and for walking us back. I'm from the UK, and it appears that in UK schools, there's a bit more of a protocol and there's a bit more of a procedure because most teachers know about sickle cell anemia. We know when a child is in crisis, we know what to do. It's almost like children who need insulin at some point in the school, or
Right.
children who need some sort of medical assistance. So it may well just be the way Canadian schools are designed, but then I'm happy with your advocacy over the years. And maybe there are now better systems for teaching assistants and teachers, and indeed the old school to have these sort of systems in place for children who are anemic. I want us to talk about some of the misconceptions around this disease. Do you find that sickle cell is prevalent amongst maybe poor Black people, or sickle cell does not choose who it afflicts? Um,
Well, that's a very good question because It has nothing to do with your socioeconomic status. Absolutely nothing. Because the two people who started the organization, the young people, one of the girls, the girl actually, is a sickle cell anemia patient. But she went to school, she had a degree in engineering, and she went on to become a doctor. And she now is working in internal medicine at UBC. There are many people who come to this recognition of illness, and sometimes they are more ambitious, because if illness is not going to affect them, what else are they going to have as a challenge? So when my daughter did nursing, and she would tell you she did nursing because she wanted to engage her health and to know when and how to talk to the doctors and the nurses from the point of view of how they would be speaking to her. So I find that health, it's purely genetics. What we have sometimes taken place in our communities is that there's a lack of recognition about the genetics of sickle cell anemia. And so sometimes they might even, they may not even want to discuss it. They may think that they've got some old wives' tales. So they may think of many other issues or that could occur for somebody to have sickle cell anemia, as opposed to understanding it's a genetic illness similar to I guess, Tay Sachs disease, cystic fibrosis, and things like that. So that's basically the big challenge we have. And some people, because they feel that something is wrong with them, that's why they have family members with sickle cell anemia. They do not want to advocate, they do not want to talk about it to the members in their community or their family members. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we experience.
Dr. Jean, I'm wondering, you've been advocating, you've been on this for 2 decades at least. Would you say the awareness has improved in schools? Would you say the awareness has improved in Edmonton and in Calgary, places where your work has been most felt? Has there been an improvement to the way the disease is being received in communities?
Of course, of course, there is an improvement. And it is probably because of the strategic things we do at Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta. You know that there's COVID-19, and we have the emergency providers who come to our door when we call 911. Well, as a member of the Rotary Club of Canada, of the Rotary International, we are going to be doing something for them in a few weeks' time. And some of the brochures, some of the pens, some of the thank you cards that we have will be given to them so they can see Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta. And we are hoping that that type of pedagogy will help to spread the word, so those who really need to know about sickle cell anemia will know more about it. Yes. Um, yeah, I would say that it has improved. And believe it or not, one of the reasons why more knowledge and more science is spent in sickle cell anemia right now has to do with the CRISPR-Cas9 and the same technology that we're using now with respect to the COVID-19 vaccine. So you now hear people talking about messenger RNA being used for COVID-19. But that was around for many years because that's one of the treatments that they're looking at with respect to sickle cell anemia, using messenger RNA to go and intersect that gene, the one marker that causes sickle cell anemia, and alter it within the person's body. So I would say, to be honest, more people are knowing more about sickle cell anemia. At first, when they were talking about COVID-19, the news people, the newscasters, didn't even know about the technology that was involved. But now I listen to them on the radio and I hear them, being more familiar with messenger RNA and talking about it. And I'm saying, yes, the public, the general public, is now getting more knowledge about the type of technology that they're hoping to use with respect to sickle cell anemia.
One thing I hear, ma'am, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I could.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. One of the misconceptions I hear about, I've not heard this during a little bit, is sickle cell is like HIV or hepatitis, and it's something that's is contagious and you can pick if you move with a certain group of people. Do you find that you hear this nonsense around?
Well, prior to I would say prior to the 21st century, those kinds of old wives' tales were all over the place because people were trying to link HIV to Africa and so sickle cell anemia to Africa. So there must be some kind of a union of these two illnesses or these two types of illnesses, etc. And so you'd hear derogatory statements being made because of sickle cell anemia. But I have to say that now that we know a lot more of the genetic compositions of our body, we of of our body per se, we are now able to analyze illnesses at the genetic level. And so people are becoming more knowledgeable about it. Of course, there may be people who would not know, but you just have to educate them so that they can see um, the reason for sickle cell anemia. And mind you, there is one marker on the DNA helix of sickle cell anemia. Of I mean, on the DNA chain, the one marker that is the problem with respect to sickle cell anemia. So it's almost when you start talking about genetics and so, it's at the point of ground zero because when you're trying to solve a problem, you look at the variables and you pull them out. Well, if it's only one variable that causes this sickle cell anemia, think about what if they were able to correct it. Think about the future of our health and our body when they now have found the cure for sickle cell anemia, understand the role that our gene plays in our illnesses, and they can take it to other levels of, I would guess, discovery when you start talking about maybe cancer, cystic fibrosis, and things like that. What are the genetic markers that cause these illnesses? And when you're talking about statistics and you're talking about changing one variable at a time, if you know how to change one variable at a time to correct it, you can just see in the future what we're talking about in terms of finding cures for illnesses.
Dr. Jean, I was just wondering, based on what you said earlier, that is the problem that there is a lack of money for research on this disease, and would you say it's because this disease affects I know people from Turkey, some parts of India, Asia, Black people generally. There's no urgency in there's no urgency or burden placed on government, or let's say assume here in Canada, the Canadian government to pour money to find a cure solution for this problem. Would you say it's because it affects a certain part of the population? There's no emergency or urgency to find a cure for it.
Well, I would say yes, because the population that has sickle cell anemia is not the dominant population, there are several problems that we're dealing with. People did not know much about sickle cell anemia, and there was no urgency for them to find a cure within the dominant discourse because it's not something that would affect their child, their parents, and so on. In addition to that, because the group of people who have sickle cell anemia do not have the social or cultural capital to go out and advocate for their health, those are two challenges that we have to overcome. And if our population, our diverse population, would first of all have young people who want to study medicine and specifically want to look after this illness, then we would have a um, and then we would have a group of people who have focused their life to work on it. So we don't have that. It's very difficult. Although sickle cell anemia was discovered by in a black man who was studying dentistry at the University of Chicago, it never took off to find people who would say, well, I had my I've had my sister who died from sickle cell. Let me go and study it. So that's one problem. And then, indeed, creating awareness and getting the funding for research is a bit of a problem. But to be honest with you, there is hope, and it's based on the work that is being done in the United States, in France, in the United Kingdom about sickle cell anemia, and of course, Israel about sickle cell anemia. So there are people who are who have focused their life's work in trying to find a cure for this illness. Um, I have to say that since there are about 3 or 4 drugs right now that have been developed in the States that we are still waiting for the government of Canada to approve them for use in Canada for patients who have sickle cell anemia. So, again, we go back to what we call advocacy. Again, we go back to those who are healthy in our communities to understand that if a patient, if one person in their community has an illness that's incurable, that they have also a right to advocate for the health of that patient. Because
Mhm.
looking at my daughter, they don't want to be at home not contributing to the labor force. They want to, but illness illnesses keep them away from it. So if our communities would think in terms of that and understand that one sick child in the community is a detriment to our labor force and help them, by either volunteering for a sickle cell organization, giving some of your tax dollars to a sickle cell organization, that will help us have more of a voice. But most importantly, know that members of our community are contributing to help us.
Mm. Thank you very much, Dr. Jean. Would you say, I know you said just now that we're close to a cure, especially with work done in Israel, United Kingdom, United States, and there's several experimental drugs that we're waiting on Canada to license to get out to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'm asking this question in context of your own experience
Mm-hmm.
as a mom of a sickle cell child.
Yeah.
Do you believe that we are closer to a cure for sickle cell, and where does a bone marrow transplant fit into all of this?
Yes, believe it or not, we are extremely close to finding a cure for sickle cell anemia. I I have to believe it because
Mm,
that is what I have been working for. But I also see a lot of I attend a lot of not functions, conferences and so on, and I see the work that is being done in order to find a cure for it. To the transplants, getting, like having bone marrow transplants, having going out and finding people who are a match, um, is something that we constantly work on. And the good thing about the organizations that we have now, especially in the United States for sickle cell anemia, is that they are very active. They go to, say, Congress, and they lobby for things that they want. There are lots of pharmaceutical companies who have found it um convenient, profitable, and just good in terms of social values, that they focus on finding a cure for it. And as I say, since it's just one marker on the DNA helix that contributes to sickle cell anemia, it's in their best interest to find the cure for it because it will help them to find a cure for many other hereditary illnesses. So I can safely say that yes, there is a lot more being work being done, and if we have not been able to get all this work done or contributions from from Canada, I because we're so close to the United States, the information that is being developed in the United States come to us, and if it's one thing that the COVID-19 crisis has brought about, is the opportunity for us in Canada to attend conferences in the States um, by virtually. So we get the information that is being talked about down there quite quickly. And so we can advocate for these patients from a position of strength.
Hmm. So I'm just wondering about your campaign with Edmonton Public Libraries and reading. And I know last week was when I was meant to have gotten this done. Last week was the read in week for
Mhm.
most Edmonton Catholic schools. So could you please help us to place your interest in reading and the EPL with sickle cell?
Well, earlier I told you about the amount of time I had to spend in the school system to ensure that my children did well in school. So that
Hmm.
meant going to the schools at all odd times and seeing how they got along. So while I had to take care of my children and help them to succeed once they were finished, or actually once they were in the grade 9 or grade 10 to 11, I literally went back to school to
Mm.
demystify the education system in terms of what is my question was, what is going on in the school system that contributes to the failure of so many blacks.
You went back to school. What does that mean?
I went back to university. I was working in the bank. I was working in the banking system, and I quit the banking system and I went back to school.
Okay,
I
but
went
at
back
this
to
time you had
university.
gotten your first and second degrees. You just wanted another layer on top of all
Yeah,
of
but I
that.
had my first degree in statistics and economics. So I was
Okay,
working in banking. And then
okay,
I decided, okay, I'm going to go and demystify what's taking place in the schools, in the education system. So I
all right.
returned to university and I started all over again with another Bachelor of Science degree. And I got my master's. But because I was working so hard with my children so that they succeeded, I spent a lot of time in my community too, observing people, seeing what they wanted, doing research in my community. So I heard the same complaint of parents in the community. Their children were not succeeding. And the effort that I was putting in to see that my children succeed, I knew that in the Caribbean, my parents never did that. And yet, still, I was able to leave my high school and come straight to Canada to university. And
mm,
a lot of my peers in the Caribbean were doing the same thing too. So I'm saying, what's going on here? So when I went back to school and I studied human ecology, and human ecology looks at how structures are built, how humans build structures to take care of themselves, but in addition, how those structures impact them. So you have a kind of a symbiotic relationship that's taking place with respect to society, the community, and the individual trying to navigate these structures. So I studied human ecology at both the Bachelor's of Science and the Master of Science. When I did my master's program, I looked at the Caribbean festival that we celebrate in Edmonton. And I think my thesis was the first of its kind in Canada because I wanted to know, why do communities who come to a new place think it is so important for them to celebrate their festivals that take place in back home. And this festival that we were celebrating in Edmonton had absolutely nothing to do with Edmonton. And it probably had nothing to do with the Caribbean, because the carnival that we celebrate in the Caribbean is a pre Lenten carnival that takes place in March. Here we were celebrating it in August, and so far away from Trinidad. So, in terms of temporal and spatial context, it was totally out of place. And when I asked the people who were celebrating the festival why, they said to me, well, they have an opportunity to identify who they are and to put on a festival and to take charge of what they were trying to do and the importance that it meant to them, because there they were, um, telling people who they are from an identity point of view, but also being responsible for putting on an event. So I did that for my master's. But when I was studying it, I asked some young students who were busy making the costumes, well, when you go back to school in the fall, do you ever talk to your classmates when the teacher asks you, what did you do in the summer? Do you ever talk about it? And they said, no. I said, what? And they turned and told me that, well, we were brought here by our parents, and our parents did very little to help us to assimilate or to get by in the school system. We were just left
mm,
adrift.
mm,
And then I decided,
mm.
that statement stuck with me. So when I went to do my PhD in education, I studied what it is in the classroom that prevents certain groups of people for becoming themselves. And I spent a lot of time studying it. And the notion was to look at the culture of the classroom that prohibited them from being themselves in the classroom. And so that stuck in my mind. And I knew once I was finished with my PhD, there were two things that were of interest to me: education and health.
So, what did you find out when you did the thesis? I'm really curious to know, what is it about the Canadian classroom that makes it hard for Black kids to graduate? That's million
There
dollar
is a lack
question.
of representation in their
Mm,
classroom.
right.
There's absolutely no discussion about who they are in the classroom.
Mm,
And so they never have an opportunity to say who they are, to identify themselves. The whole notion is to ensure that they become little Canadians But Canada is a multicultural country. So if you want to practice the tenets of multiculturalism, there should be spaces in the classroom for that multicultural notion to find to grow.
Expression.
You're not saying that you are from Trinidad. Many of these young students probably have never gone back to where they've come from. Certainly, their children would have a distant relationship to their motherland of their parents. But at least you bring who you are into the classroom, and you become a hybrid of what's taking place in the whole Canadian structure. So I found out that, for example, when I was a child going to school, my teachers knew who my parents were. And I couldn't slack off in the classroom because they would tell me that the work that I am producing is unacceptable to my father. And that's all the only message I needed to ensure that they had my interests at heart
Yeah.
because they could relate to my parents. And my
Yeah.
parents never went to the school to do much, even though they were bright. They never had to go to the school because we talk about education and the whole notion of teaching. You are in loco parentis, and that was it. So I decided when I left, when I graduated, that one of the way to encourage this kind of discussion in the classroom would be to introduce literature into the classroom that would really, really, really
Dr. Jean, please hold
promote.
on. You're saying a lot of things there that mentally I'm struggling with, finding it problematic. Dr. Jean, are you saying what you found in essence when you did this thesis was in a multicultural classroom, you find German students, Russian children, Filipino, Bangladeshi, Pakistani? Did your research find out that it was just the black kids that were lacking representation at this time and the teachers could not relate to the black kids? Is this what you found out?
Actually, actually, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But what I am saying is that, first of all, when you go to do research, you can only tackle a small part of the problem. Okay? The other part that you're dealing with as a visible minority, you are there to stand out. It does not matter if you were born in Canada or
Mm,
if you were not born in Canada. I know that because my daughter who is a nurse, she would, even though she was born in Montreal, people would confront her to ask her where she's from.
mm,
And she would say, Montreal. No, 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 where are you from? And she would repeat it over and over again until the person got fed up and said, okay, where are your parents from?
mm,
Now, if her skin color was white, I should say Caucasian, she was born in Canada, she would have assimilated into the melting pot.
mm.
And no one would ask her that question.
Oh,
So
yes.
if you are Scottish and if you are German and you come to Canada, within one generation, you have assimilated into the dominant discourse. Now, how problematic is that is something that we will have to deal with in the future. But the group of people that points out that problem are people who are visible minorities.
Mm,
Yes, so this is why I was fortunate being a black person to be able to look at that. So I'll talk about the African and Caribbean Canadian books in color. So again, going back to COVID, I was very fortunate because I homeschooled my grandson last year, at the beginning of when he went to school, and he was age 6. And what I found out that the classroom that he was in, there were so many mixed kids. You would see somebody whose parent is from Jamaica, one parent from Jamaica, the next one from Mexico, one parent from Jamaica, the next one from Colombia. And you're getting all these kind of hybrids and mixtures of people in the classroom. And you would see that when the teacher asked them to talk about who they are, you'd see them bringing in a flag from Mexico, a flag from Costa Rica, and so on into the classroom. So I am thinking from a education point of view, you realize that it's not the teacher's fault that because they have to deal with a classroom of many mixtures of cultures, and we are in a classroom and in a country that talks about multiculturalism. That teacher really they have their hands full to start with, and to go out and start looking for books of interest that would bring all the children together in the classroom is a daunting task. So I said, you know what? And then this came up also because of the George Floyd incident, and you had all these different people in the classroom in society making all kinds of statements. But you have to realize that society creates its own society. If you want your society to be somewhat different, you would have to be responsible for it, because as a member of society, you are creating your society. So I just said, I think that what we need in order to have a good discussion about race, a good discussion about a good discussion about Black Lives Matter, I said one has to remove oneself from the street and really reflect on what would make those changes in society that you think is necessary. And you have to go back to education. So we worked to produce a K to 12 curriculum. And the curriculum, we said we were going to focus on books between 2015 to the present time, because those books would be very relevant to our days, to today's society. And we would introduce these in the classroom and make it easier for teachers, for parents, for librarians, for anybody in the community to see recommended books that they can introduce to their own level of knowledge, to introduce into different, like classrooms and so, and not have to be thinking about, do I have to read all the books that are there before I could choose a few that to take to the classroom. So I introduced it, and the library really went for it. So last summer of 2021, I had four young students, post post secondary students, and there were two whose heritage takes them back to the Caribbean, two whose heritage take them back to Africa, one who was biracial, and so on. And I had them sit and read books and choose the ones that they felt they would like to have seen in their curriculum. So it's on the basis of that sort of process that we were able to choose more than 300 books for K to 12, um, for students, parents, the community to explore. And I want to stress that these books are not chosen so that the Black students in the classroom can have something to reflect on. It's chosen so that all students, everybody, can learn a little bit more about what it means to be Black, and can have, serious but intentional discussions on those topics. So
Mm.
hopefully it will work.
Doctor, thank you so much. That was really insightful and very well explained. I hopefully will work. I'm just concerned. Well, maybe not concerned. I'm anxious now to hear, because we're nearly at the end of this. What your succession plans are? I hope you have a team of young men and women that you're breathing the life into to take up this. it's dawning on me that this battle, this education and history thing is a big deal. It'd be nice for my daughter, our friends, for black kids generally to be able to go into a public space and see a book that looks like them. It means a lot.
Mhm.
So I want you to quickly tell us what you're doing in inspiring the next generation to carry on the work. So we're having Dr. Walrons everywhere across Alberta, people who would carry on this baton, even if they cannot work in terms of health, they're not qualified. What about education? Everybody can jump in for education.
Well, you see, that's the thing, that's the beauty of doing research in your own community. Because as I said, I'm always involved in my community. But you remember I told you that I did my master's research in my community looking at the Carnival Festival. And this notion of reciprocity, giving back, comes quite clear to me when I went out to do my research in my community, because they felt, well, one of the things they said to me, since you are so interested in researching this carnival, why don't you become a member of the board? And I said, you know what, I am not really into that type of stuff. But they guilted me into becoming a member of the board, and I ended up being the president and putting on very successful events. Uh, what I found now, in some cases, you find that the way that I am thinking, maybe other people are not thinking. So for me, I would have felt very comfortable if we were able to introduce into the classroom the concepts that make up the carnival that we celebrate. How do you make those costumes? What kind of eye do you have for color? How do you get those costumes to float in the air as we go down the streets and parading? So the notion of, or the theory of street carnival, street festival, is something that we should be able to move the carnival that we do here onto another level. How do you create these massive costumes? How do you look at these costumes and turn them into the video games that you have? What are the parts that you need to have a marquee? So that's one thing. I try to influence the young people by applying for projects that we have here at the Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta. I apply for funding and I hire them and I pay the young people to do good career oriented jobs. So when I had those four students develop the K to 12 curriculum, that was, they were given a position in the library as a child reference librarian to, and that's a skill that librarians have to have. So you try to give them career oriented positions. And then at the same time, I tell them, listen, I am not having you do this just because. I would like you to understand what I am empowering you to do by giving you these positions, because it's not, you're not here just to get a salary. You're here to work to enlighten our community, to grow our community, and to find and to pay these things forward. So I am always, I'm happy actually, because I've been living in Edmonton for quite a while, and there are many people who know me. I'm quite embarrassed to say so. But go, and I always try, if anybody I speak to, I always tell them the beauty of having a good education and the beauty of being able to give back to your society and the importance of being able to give back to your society. Because whether we want to believe it or not, if I were in Trinidad or if you were back home where your parents are from, you would have to give back to society. So what's the difference here?
Hmm.
You know?
Oh, my goodness, I've enjoyed. I didn't plan to stay up to an hour, but we're 6 minutes to the top of the hour, and I want to say big thank you, Dr. J. But before I let you go, one thing is still not clear. I hear what you're saying. You are empowering the youths. to take up the baton, to be useful, to get involved locally. But what I'm still not hearing is who gets to be Dr. Walrod, who are you mentoring, who is in the university right now ready to take this challenge on.
I understand what you're saying, and I want to be very humble about it. I try not to take praise for what I do, but I keep pushing people along. And we do have a succession plan at Sickle Cell Foundation of Alberta because I keep telling them if I get hit by a bus, I hope one of
Well,
you
you're not
can
gonna,
take
I'm one
over.
of those people. Touch wood, it's not gonna happen. My mom won't talk about plans, so
Mm.
it's something I feel severely uncomfortable even hearing now. But that's not where I'm going. I think you alluded to the fact that the SCFA will carry on, and I'm very happy with that. Before
Mhm.
you go, I want us to tell us: have you voted? Elections are on Monday, October 18th. I want us to quickly do politics here. Who did you vote for? Could you please share that with us and then we'll let you
Actually,
go?
one of the reasons why I was slow in coming to set up today was because as I was getting coming downstairs, my telephone rang, and somebody on the other end asked me about whom I was going to vote for, and I told the person I haven't made up my mind as yet.
That's disheartening. Okay.
However,
Hmm.
however, elections, as President Obama says, has consequences. So we really have to vote because if you're not part of the electoral process, you should not or could not complain.
Mm.
So think about voting. We live in a country where your vote counts, so people should go out and vote. And it's a secret ballot system, so people do not have to know. But whoever gets elected, you should feel empowered to go and have a discussion with them and not think that you've elected them and then leave them to blow in the wind.
We
You-
try at LCC Media, God knows. I do my bits.
and I'm
Nobody
very
believes.
political because I do participate in the electoral process. I do participate in going out and helping people knock on doors and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like it, it, I cannot stress enough how important it is if you can only give 1 hour
Anyway.
a month
Yeah.
to go out and do some community development work.
Mm.
Go out and do it.
I
Somebody
love
will be
you.
helpful. Huh?
I love you so much because you've managed to tarry the question. We didn't get who you were voting for, but you've encouraged us all to go out and vote. The advanced voting ongoing, and then
Well,
vote
this
for,
is the whole
supporting
notion
them.
about what it means to be a Canadian. It's a secret ballot. You should participate in the electoral process. If you have an opportunity to go
I
and
mean,
volunteer with any candidate and go
mm,
and deliver flyers for them, go and see how the electoral process operates. Because many people do not realize in some cases where the election takes place. The
mm.
election does not necessarily take place on the day that it's called. Sometimes the election takes place at the community level where you elect a candidate. But how many people realize that?
No, fair enough. Uh, to be honest, I've had a really good time, and I'm not quite sure what I was hoping, but you've exceeded my expectations. I am I'm so deliriously happy. I want to say thank you for spending the last hour. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the people watching, people who will catch this up later, watch this later, would have learned a thing or two. So, Dr. Jane, I'm going to end the broadcast right now, but
Okay.
please don't go away. Thank you all for watching. That was Ladies Corner with T. See you next time.